And welcome back, college hockey fans. It is NCHC on MNCAA Max Veech, along with myself, Nick Maxson. NCHC Frozen Faceoff, the last call in St. Paul, is just days away. We'll preview that as well as, shall we say, talk about the ending of our two teams in the season, both St. Cloud and Duluth, both out after being eliminated in the quarterfinals. Both teams in the pairwise will not be at large bids. So seasons are over for both the Huskies and the Bulldogs. We'll touch on some other NCHC topics and maybe college hockey as a whole. So without further ado, Max Veech, welcome back to you, my friend. I wish it was under, shall we say, better circumstances, but here we are, middle of March. This is tournament time in both of our squads, which for really the better part of a decade plus were mainstays in this conversation, and both of our teams will be sitting out this year.
Yeah, I was laughing to myself a little bit. You said, neither of our teams would be at large bids, as if it was even a point of possibility over the last couple of weeks here. That dream was gone about January, middle of January, I think, for me. And that's just kind of brutal to think about, especially like you had mentioned at the very end there as well. Having been in that conversation and in the deeper part of March and into April for a decent run there. But I think for anybody that paid attention to Sandilands postseason presser, the last weekly presser of the year anyway, UMD fans and everybody in the building just kind of got spoiled for a decade, and we're learning how to survive as a small program again here, and trying to build with what we've got. So yeah, I wish it was under different circumstances. I wish we could talk about our teams a couple more weeks here, but plenty more college hockey to be played, both in conference tournaments and then the overall postseason play as well. I know I'll still be watching. I'm not going to blame anybody else if they tune out. If they've got all of their eggs in one basket, that's totally fine. But I still love it. So yeah, happy to be here. Happy to talk about what we can while we can.
Right. So I guess let's kind of dive into first the quarterfinal results. I'm going to start with your team, Max, because we'll put it this way. On the score sheet, for those who maybe just paid attention to the scores, this was close, really. UMD put up a fight. Unfortunately, Arizona State does win it. Again, best of three. They take it in 2 games. But let's just say Duluth made them earn it. This wasn't a series where it was lopsided. I know at times, shall we say, Arizona State probably had more of a hold on the series, but again, Duluth did not, shall we say, roll over. They made them earn it here last weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I would say it was the matchup that I wanted going into the weekend between, our two, whether one was going to go to Western and one was going to go to ASU, because I think both of us thought that we matched up better against ASU. And even after the weekend getting swept by them, I still think that was probably the better play and better thing for UMD. They certainly had chances in both games. And they made it a hell of a series. I think it was one of the more fun ones to watch throughout the country overall, especially that Saturday game. Talk about the swings going in there. But we'll go through game by game here. Friday night, 4-3 loss. ASU won that one. They being UMD. Had a rough start. I think they gave up a goal under 5 minutes again. And then the second goal to ASU at 6:44. So down 0-2 against a higher seeded team when your season's on the line, in what has historically been, at least for this year, a really bad starting point for you. Did not feel great. It set a pretty bad tone for the team, but they bounced back pretty nicely from that, and it was nice to see that level of fight come out of them. The Max Plant, Dom James, Zam Plant trio, I guess, of people that you like to see on the score sheet were the ones that ended up on the score sheet again today, Friday. And it just felt like things were kind of clicking the way that we had expected them or wanted them to click throughout the rest of the season, or even at the start of the season, which may have been unfair to expect out of a team that hasn't played together and largely freshman dominated in terms of the points throughout the season. But it was nice to see it happen at the end here. And I just, lament that we're not going to get to see Dom James contribute much more ever again in the UMD sweater, from everything that I've heard anyway. So with that being the case, it was just, looking at everything else throughout that game in particular. It was Gajan's first start against ASU. Would have loved to get him a win. He didn't get one either. Just 7 penalties in the game. I don't know if that was an indication of tighter play or if that was an indication of, refs kind of holding their whistles. And 2 of those were after the game. Technically, they were issued in the 20th minute and after everything was all done. I can't remember the player from ASU that came up and just gave a nice little 2-hand to Max Plante standing in front of the net after the final whistle blew. Then he gave it the exact same shot right back. And so they just issued coincidental minors. Nothing carried over to the next game or whatever. It was just something on the stat sheet for people to note, which was an indication of kind of the fight that both of these 2 teams kind of gave in that early Friday game. And it set the tone for Saturday as well. I like Max Plante sticking up for himself. He's certainly not the biggest guy that's going to be out on the ice. So if you're going to try and pick on him, I'm glad that he's not one of the ones that just backs down or relies on somebody else to fight his battles. He's kind of a fiery, gritty guy, gets it from his dad. And I love having it on my team. So I've got no qualms with that, especially since it wasn't anything that was going to carry over into the next day. Now, should that have been something larger where you get suspended the next day, we would be having a different conversation, because in my, totally unbiased opinion, he was the best player on the ice in the series, certainly for UMD. But I think there was quite a few people with an ASU sweater on that were thinking the exact same thing, just given how he's played against them, but in this 2-game series at the end of the season particularly. So with that being said, goes into Saturday. We kind of teased at the beginning there, a 5-6 overtime loss for UMD in this one. But that score sheet looks very familiar to what we've seen all year and the night before. Max Plante, Matthew Perkins, that's a new name. I think it was only his second goal of the season. And then you get Shaugabay on there twice and Dom James again. So there's one wild card mixed in there, which I love to see. He's put in a hell of a lot of work to, get into a position where he was able to take shots like that and just find time on the ice. So credit to him for that. But again, like I mentioned, Max Plante, the biggest player in this series, and he's had a hell of a season against ASU. He's scored in all 6 games he's played against them, got points in all 6 games. I think he scored in 5 of them, which has been awesome. I think it was a 3-point game on Saturday, which was his 9th multi-point game of the season. As a freshman, you literally cannot ask for any more. So I'm done waxing poetically about him for now anyway. But yeah, that Saturday game, it had a different feel to it right off the bat. They being UMD scored 3 goals in that first period and held it throughout the remainder of the period there. You kind of felt like, oh, this is their game to lose. They were pissed off. They're fighting for their season. And then you're like, man, I hope they can just kind of come out and maintain this pace and tone. And they did not. They gave up 3 goals in 5 minutes to ASU to start the second there. Brutal. And then, it was technically a level playing field, but at that time it felt like you were fighting a losing war for whatever reason. I think that the first 2 ASU goals, neither of them are what you would call pretty. They were just, people spinning and throwing pucks at the net or getting a crazy bounce. It was stuff was just going their way. And it's unfortunate for UMD to see that. And it's unfortunate for Gajan to have to deal with that, because I don't think it wouldn't have mattered if it was him or Connor Hellebuck in that those pucks were going in off of just, crazy shots. So boys battled back. It was a heavyweight fight. Obviously with a 5-6 final scoreboard, it certainly felt like it anyway. But they went back and forth. They just kind of traded goals, and that's what made it really fun to watch. Is there was not, despite the scoreboard, there was not an overwhelming thought of they're just giving up too many high scoring chances. It was just the guys were making the most of the opportunities they had on both sides of the puck, and that's what made it such a good, fun series to watch. So tough one to end the season on. Tough way to end the season when you think that you had a shot, especially being up 3-0 in that game. And the overtime winner is something that I know Gajan wants back, and quite a few people in the UMD fan base were had some words about, we'll say. It wasn't the prettiest goal. It was not a high scoring position on the ice. It was almost reminiscent of the Minnesota State High School game winning, championship goal that was scored from beneath the goal line in the offensive zone there. Not quite as egregious, but pretty similar. And it was a rough way to go out, but there's quite a bit to build on with the core that's there, especially the young group of guys that was on the stat sheet all weekend. And I'm sure we'll go into postseason review of UMD, St. Cloud, NCHC, just general teams as a whole at a later date. So I won't get too much into the futures now, but I would be lying and not covering whatever we could if I just didn't mention that those probably 5 most important freshmen, both being both Plante brothers, Shaugabay, Kleber, and I throw Ty Hansen in there as well, for the guys that we want to say stick around 2-3 years, in addition to what you've already got under your belt here, and you're going to be a hell of a player, and this is going to be one dangerous program. So overall thoughts, 5 straight 1-goal games between UMD and ASU. So all the credit that ASU gets as a program. I'm not saying UMD deserves the same because they can compete with them, but I don't think UMD was as bad of a team as their record ended up showing this year. There was quite a few that they would want back. Injuries happened to everybody. Plante injuries certainly didn't help them figuring it out with the freshman goaltenders. It is what it is at the end of the season. So as far as the series goes, UMD was only outshot 1 period all week or all weekend. And that was period 1 of game 2, which they ended up scoring three outscoring ASU 3-0 on. So I don't have too much to nitpick other than the fact that it was tough to see them relinquish that big of a lead on Saturday and not be able to make it to at least a Sunday game and give their seniors a little bit more to fight for. So that's all I had. But St. Cloud, it was a similar story for them in terms of not making it to a game 3. And it was just maybe a little bit different fashion. So what details do you have for me there?
Much different, right? This was the team nobody wanted to face, meaning Western Michigan, right?
Right.
And let's put it this way. If there's anything that came out of this weekend, it showed to those who only scoreboard watch.
Yeah.
Slight pinprick to a few of folks that are out there, but that's okay. That at the end of the day, this is not an Isaac Posh created situation.
Yeah.
Number one, give a tip of the cap to Western Michigan. That's a wagon of a team, right? Yep. That's a hell of a hockey team. And they showed it. And I think if there's anything that you can feel good about merely from a fan perspective is if you are rooting for the Broncos, that team did not come into this weekend and take the Huskies lightly. They did not. They were all business. You could see by the way they played the game that they've got bigger things on their mind, and they know that they cannot take a break from any opponents. And Firschweiler had made mention of this to a couple of the local media out in Kalamazoo that, hey, St. Cloud won 3 of 5 before going into this weekend's matchup, right? And they took one on the road against Denver. That's like, okay, yes, they had a tough stretch, but this is this team now. We can't take them lightly, right? You can't make that mistake, and they did not. 6-2 the finals in both of the both games. I would argue Friday was the worst of the 2 games. The penalty trouble, we'll put it that way, did not help them. Werner Miettinen taking not 1, not 2, but 3 penalties, and St. Cloud got scored on 2 of those in the first period. It was looking great.
Was it Vidi that made it through without a penalty in his St. Cloud career?
Vidi, no, he did get penalized, but Actually, you
I'm
know
trying
what?
to think
Check the
who.
scoreboard on that. I think he did get called a couple times, but it wasn't
Okay.
much. It was like maybe 1 or 2 in his entire career. The brother who we're referring to, right, Max, was the sharpshooter, right?
Yeah.
He's now off playing professionally in Finland. Werner was, no question, back home when these two kids are growing up. He was the one feeding him the pucks for him to one-time.
Sure.
So, just not great, right? And this team this year just has not been good about chasing the game. When you score 2.21 goals per game, that's already a concern when you don't score first. And essentially, that's what happened on Friday. Is that they got back-to-back power play chances. That was a 5-on-3. Matteo Constantini made us pay twice in the first. Josh Lidke getting us back to within 2-1 with about 30 seconds left in the first gave us some hope.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll put it this way: 3 goals in the second, 4-1.
Turn the heat up.
Yeah, 5-1 was the advantage after 40 minutes. Huskies tried to make something of it with a Werner Miettinen power play goal of a rebound chance, but Alex Bump halfway through that third made it 6-2. At that point, just too much to overcome. And then night number 2, I thought the Huskies actually played a lot better in that game. Again, it's the penalties. A power play goal from Alex Bump just 7 minutes into the contest doesn't help. And then Sidlowski and Tim Washi adding to a 3-0 lead into the third. St. Cloud tried to get something going with Tyson Gross, made it 3-1, but Wyatt Shingothi, 4-1. Killed all momentum. Werner Miettinen getting back to 4-2. And then with over 6 minutes to play, nothing to lose, Brett Larson pulls his goaltender, a couple of empty netters by both Alex Bump and Tim Washi to seal it. It kind of encapsulates the way this year has gone for St. Cloud. And Max, I want to ask you this, because at the end of the day, for Huskies fans, how disappointing is the season in the sense of the whole talk of this season prior to any games being played was if we can clean up the non-conference record, we'll be in a much better spot. I still remember watching St. Cloud getting swept by Boston College, but the takeaway was I feel pretty good about it because they
kept up with them.
They kept up with them. You take away a terrible goalie interference call, which was not goalie interference in that first game. That could have been a split. That could have changed the complexion of that weekend. And but beyond the non-conference schedule, when you got to conference play, this team just was never really able to replicate that same sort of style of play and execution, especially on the offensive side of the puck after that. When Isaac Posh goes down, and again, I'm going to beat this like a dead horse and I don't care, is all it did was more expose the flaws on this team. And those flaws were, one, again, we talked about it before, the lack of offense. Number 2, especially the lack of offense from the blue line. I think if there's one area that the Huskies are going to look at very closely this offseason is going to be the blue line. Now, they do have Tanner Hendricks that's just supposed to be coming back. I shouldn't say coming back, coming into as a freshman. He is a defenseman playing with the Lincoln Stars, a Columbus Blue Jackets 3rd-round pick. He's got a plethora of points to his name. So that should help, but just not Huskies hockey the way we're used to seeing it. And again, a Division I record, 11-game losing streak. That was rough. And I've said this before, and I want to make sure I say this again, is still credit to that room, that organization, that coaching staff that still took the time to answer questions, as tough as it probably was to have to talk about it night after night. You don't get coaches that always do that. They're at some point you reach a breaking point, as anybody would, right?
Right.
But they faced it. They kept going to work week after week. Just couldn't get the results to go their way. It was a flawed season at the end of the day, and unfortunately, Western Michigan put an end to it far too early in that regard. So, yeah, it felt different, right, Max? Because
right,
number 1, you got a really good Bronco squad that's doing things, and 2, the end results encapsulated just how disappointing the last 3 or 4 months really was for that squad, really going into December. So Yeah, long-winded answer, but it was different feeling where I feel like the Bulldogs, although we're in the same spot, right? I think there's a bit more of an optimism surrounding your squad, just considering again the fight you put up. And we've talked about in the preseason, right? That this recruiting class with the Plants, the Shaugabays,
Yeah.
you mentioned Ty Hansen, who looks really good. He's a speedster.
Yeah.
If everybody stays and they can build around with another good recruiting class and maybe some, shall we say, the free agent acquisitions from the transfer portal, at the end of the day, UMD could turn things around pretty quickly. St. Cloud State is gonna, they need some run support, number one. They're gonna get some, and we'll obviously do more of that breakdown once we get further away from the college hockey season when it ends as a whole. But there's a lot more work to do in the Cardinal Black than there is in the Maroon and Gold from the Iron Range side of things.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I was giggling to myself over here when you were talking about St. Cloud State's season ending too early and us, ending at the same spot, because I was posting erratically and I had put out something saying at the end of the season, or at the end of the day, everybody's going to remember that UMD's season lasted longer than St. Cloud's. Just as a little jab. It wasn't necessarily a subtweet at you, but you were included in the group.
I was
for sure.
You knew I was too. You knew it.
I know, and I knew you would see it. So it was, UMD making it that one extra period just was something that is an accomplishment for me, and something that I can hold over them again. Next year we're not going to have a new team for me to post my favorite graphic of St. Cloud State years in D1 and championship 0, and then new school years in D1 1 championship 0. So I had to get my licks in where I could, just given that there wasn't a ton to brag about this year outside of just head-to-head competition. So apologies to the St. Cloud State fans and anybody else that had to see it, but it's all in good fun and something that is obviously not one that I should be bragging about, because UMD lost the game anyway after I had posted that. So maybe you just put it on me anyway. But had to get that out there as to why I might have been laughing when people are watching and you're talking about some pretty disappointing end to season for both squads.
Just remember, fan bases won't forget, Max.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, right? I mean, kind of going back to your series too. I mean, we talked about how close it was. Yeah. Although UMD, again, had that 3-0 lead in game number 2, and Arizona State, I mean, you got to tip the cap to there too. I mean, they at the first intermission said, okay, we got to wake up here, right? These guys aren't going away, and they did, right? And
very quickly.
One of the dangers of that Arizona State team is not only, and I'm sure you've watched, them play throughout this year, is how fast they are, how up tempo they are, how well they move the puck. And also what happens when their back's against the wall, right? If they are able to somehow, some way get to the NCAA tournament, they could be a sneaky dark horse for some teams. And Max, maybe I should ask you this, because Denver beating Colorado College, after going through some of the math, now it seems like that was more of a necessity than anything, right? Had they lost to Colorado College, they could have slipped down to what some projections could have been as low as 14 or 15 in the pairwise. And it's odd too, right? Because let's not forget, Denver started the season 12-0.
Yeah.
And it feels like that was 10 years ago, Max. And I'm not sure what it is, but, and again, it's a new season, new roster, all that good jazz, but Denver being, having one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in college hockey, a roster that is able to rifle off 12 straight wins, doesn't seem to be getting the same attention nationally as, say, some other squads. And could it be the flashy talent? I don't know. I want to get your opinion on why Denver isn't maybe at the forefront of some conversations. And granted, I think we're on the same page with this, but I just want to hear from your mouth as to, is Denver getting overlooked really more than anything?
I certainly think that they are, and it's similar to them being overlooked at the end of last year. Is they're The reason I think that I'm gonna start my sentence over. The reason I think they're getting overlooked is because their best player plays defense. It's not they don't have an Isaac Howard, they don't have a Jimmy Snugger, they don't have somebody who's putting up crazy stat lines. Zeev Buium is as NHL ready as anybody I've seen on the ice this year in college hockey. I think, maybe some people in the Wild fan base need to temper their expectations and don't force the Brock Faber narrative on him. He probably isn't going to be Brock Faber his first year in the league. But if he's 3/4 of that, I don't think anybody's going to be disappointed with that either. So he plays smart with the puck. I think he knows where everybody on this team is going to be and where they should be. And he kind of guides and is, what do you call it? The guy that leads the orchestra, whatever his name is. That's what Zeev Buium is.
He's
conductor.
Yes.
He is the conductor of the entire Denver team as a whole. And when he's on the ice, it's clearly evident. So him being their number 1A piece is probably why they kind of go under the radar. And if he has an off night, I mean, you can kind of see that with them as well, whether he's missing from the team, out somewhere, which doesn't happen all that often. Injured, again, doesn't happen all that often. Or is just, having a rough night where he's playing poorly for whatever reason. Other people have stepped up. They've got Eric Polkamp. They've got quite a few other guys that can do it. Jack Devine. And if they need to steal a game with their goaltender, he's proven that he can do it. But yeah, that's what I think is different from them compared to a BC, where you have that. I mean, they've got a great goaltender as well that they can lean on, but they've got offensive firepower that not many people can compete with. Michigan State, same type of thing. I already mentioned Isaac Howard and some of the other people that are there. Red Savage. Maine, again, great goaltender, but they've got, I think McCarr's brother is there. And it's one of those things that they just don't compete offensively, and they rely on winning a game a different way, which has worked out well for them. So I'm not gonna fault them for it, but I think that is the difference between Denver and some of these other clubs. And when you're playing, NCHC play, and other people try and play a style that's a lot more difficult to win for Denver, that's why you see them struggle in conference play more than they do in non-conference play, and why they have so much more success elsewhere. Historically, that also has had quite a bit to do with age, size, and just other general talent, but I think that's why we've seen NCHC's success in the postseason as well. Not that other teams can't win, just that they've got, when it's a 50-50 game, they've got more of the edge over some of these other teams. And this is as good of a year as any for somebody else being one of the other conferences to make their move and make a claim for a national championship, because there's probably going to be a significant lack of NCHC representatives in there, probably 3 at most. But I would still say counting Denver out of a Frozen Four appearance is risky, despite the fact that they're probably not in the top 8 right now of the pairwise.
I don't disagree with that, Max. And because Denver plays championship style hockey, right? Which is, like you said, they're not flashy, right? But as we saw last year going into St. Paul, is the close games, the low scoring games, they're not bothered by that, right? This is where teams like Boston College and even at times in Minnesota, because it's Big Ten, but also other reasons, they rely on having that comfortable offensive first type style. And when you're met with this sometimes defensive first and I don't want to say conservative forecheck, because it isn't, but where they're okay with being patient, right? They're okay with managing the game as a whole 60 minutes and not necessarily concerned about losing or maybe backing up a 50-50 puck, right? They wait for the right opportunities to go and to take those calculated risks. Whereas I think other teams, especially on the East Coast, they feel like their path to victory is to outscore their opponent. And Denver's perfectly fine to say, well, okay, that's fine. But that dries up in the playoffs. Right? We've seen super teams who can score at will all of a sudden run dry when it gets to the NCAA tournament, and that's where Denver thrives. That's where I would say even NCHC, the league as a whole, thrives, because that's what it is. in the regular season in conference play every single weekend against opponents is it's so hard to score. At times it's hard to defend, and it really becomes about, how can we best, shall we say, mitigate those in-game decisions to make the right one for the betterment of the team. And it doesn't come easy, right? There's a lot of natural instincts that sometimes high-profile goal scorers have to play. I mean, let's take you had the jab here at St. Cloud. Let's throw Isaac Howard names out there, right? Right. But objectively, right, Max, he is a benefit of the Big Ten system, meaning he's a Hobey Baker finalist, Big Ten leading scorer. We knew he had the natural talent. He's a high pick of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and UMD, just their style of play didn't sync with the way Isaac Howard likes to play, right? And that's what we're talking about between the NCHC and other conferences is Isaac Howard can thrive in that sort of system because he wants the puck in his stick. He wants those big offensive recurring chances. And sometimes that means you're sacrificing a bit defensively to get those chances. Whereas UMD doesn't play that style. St. Cloud doesn't. Denver doesn't, right? That's the difference. And that's where the NCHC has won 6 national championships to its name, as they play a 200-foot game, whereas other conferences simply rely on the offensive side of the puck. Am I crazy, or do you see the same thing?
100% agree with you and everything you said there. I think you get into the ECAC, they're probably the most similar in terms of how they structure their teams. Harvard being the exception in terms of them bringing in a ton of young talent and rotating them in and out. But everybody else there seems to favor the larger, slower style of puck control play, which is more similar to the NCHC. But I would say Hockey East leans more towards that Big Ten style, where they've got a lot more offensive weapons, just trying to show off what they've got. And if they've got, a good goalie or defensive player or somebody else, they'll make plays when they have to, but they certainly don't need or feel the need that they have to focus on that defensive side of the game as one of their strong suits. So yeah, I would say that that's the difference in those 4. And then you've got the CCHA and Atlantic Hockey somewhere in the middle of those, just kind of depending on roster makeup of each of those teams. And I think that factors pretty heavily into the evolution of those conferences, but those teams in general. Like we've seen Bemidji, for example. I keep talking about teams that we're most familiar with, but Bemidji, for example, used to be a trap game, defensive focused, and they're not going to have anything high scoring. And they still lean low scoring games, but they've got offensive weapons that they kind of transitioned into not holding back anymore and kind of giving up some of the structure that they had in favor of trying to score a couple more goals here or there. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, but that might just be more of the direction hockey is going now as well, and people trying to get with the times, if you will. But yeah, things start to happen for different teams for different reasons. But I would say your NCHC, ECACs tend to lean one way. Hockey East and Big Ten tend to lean the other in the focus of kind of what their specialties are.
Can't disagree with that. And again, we see that play out more as we get to the NCAA tournament, which leads us to perfect segue, Max. It is now the Frozen Faceoff in St. Paul, the last call in St. Paul, as they have marketed it, going to home sites starting next season for the tournament. So that will be a change. We'll put it that way. But here's something that's also different this year, Max, is of the 4 teams that are there, and I think the 4 teams that are left are the right teams that should be there, right? I don't think anybody's contesting that. But all but 1, meaning 3 of our teams that are left, have something to play for, meaning their spot in the NCAA tournament are not guaranteed. That includes Denver. This is Arizona State and North Dakota. Western Michigan, I think, is pretty much a lock in. I've looked at College Hockey News and a couple of other spots, College Hockey Yank. It seems like no matter what happens this weekend, they're going to be in the tournament. The question is, if they win, could they put themselves perhaps in a number 1 seed potentially, with the Gophers doing Gopher things, unfortunately.
Right. Yep.
So in theory, all 4 of the teams have something to play for, which means, Max, this could be one wild ride here there's the next 3 games in St. Paul. I kind of start with the first matchup there. That's going to be North Dakota and Western Michigan. This was a matchup that Western Michigan won handily in the regular season, which was, well, if you're Broncos fans, that was said quite a bit throughout the regular conference schedule. But this one, again, hard to tell because North Dakota, we know who they are, meaning that they're kind of like that East Coast style team right now, where goaltending has been, shall we say, a stain at times this season. They've got some good young talent with Sasha Boisvert and EJ Emery, who is also looking and on track, according to the Grand Forks Herald and Brad Schlossman, to be available this weekend for the games if possible, which adds some much needed stability on their blue line. Meanwhile, Western Michigan is just a well-oiled machine. Let's talk about this matchup first. Again, it's a winner-take-all, one of one. Who comes out on top in this matchup?
I have to favor Western in here, but it also pains me to say it. I'm going to be rooting for North Dakota just because I would like to see that final matchup between North Dakota and ASU to see one of those teams is going to be getting into the NCAA playoffs in that championship game. So from a theatric standpoint, I want North Dakota to win. Don't clip that. But from a logical standpoint, who I think is going to win and who I've seen win most this season, it's got to be Western. You mentioned it; they've had the better of North Dakota in the overall series. The only North Dakota win was a 4-3 overtime win back at the beginning of the month here for North Dakota against Western. So they get the night game because Western has the 1 seed. I don't know if they had the option to choose that or they automatically get the primetime game. They're both going to be on CBS Sports, so I don't think that has anything to do with it. Yeah. That might also have had something to do with North Dakota fans will only have to take a half day to make it all the way down to St. Paul versus the whole day off. So, I think that is going to be a good game, significantly better than it has been earlier in the season. And a lot of that has to do with the goaltending position for North Dakota. Yes, TJ Semptimphelter has been shaky at best at times to start the season. But since the holiday break, I want to say since January, but I don't know how far back it goes, since at least February, but a little bit back into January, I think he's been, top 10 goaltender in terms of metrics and for expected goals against versus actual goals against. And it's been a good turnaround for him and North Dakota overall. But if you start to see those flashes of what he had at the beginning of the season and giving up some of the easier goals or just being shaky and making some poor strategic positional plays, then you're going to have an uphill battle against a team like Western, and specifically Alex Bump. He's been a nightmare for them and just about everybody else in the country that he's played against. So I think it is going to be both of these games I expect to be good for different reasons. I expect that North Dakota Western game to be quite physical and a closer, lower scoring game than what we've seen from Western in the past, just because they've had so much success